So this is just before introduced Andrew Menaker and his presentation. We're in a period here in early February where we're on the other side of the FOMC and we're on the other side of the payroll number, and the market got strong. Now, the last two sessions, if you're watching this in the future on recording, this won't be as relevant, but the last two trading sessions have been a bit choppy. You got to keep an eye and ear on news and geopolitical events. There are going to be rumblings that come around that could create some really major transitional moments. What they could be, you never know until after they come out. It's a real important item to keep your eyes and ears on, and that's what community helps with, because nothing's going on, and whap, something's going on, and you're like, what happened? So you want to minimize, eliminate the what happened moments. That's what's going on with this slow moving market that we're kind of exposed to. So without going on and on about that too much, let me introduce briefly Andrew Menaker. You guys could look him up, or maybe he'll give you a bio at some point. He's been someone who's worked from the psychology standpoint with many traders for a long time. There have been some Edge members that have done stuff with Andrew in the past, they've told me, and they have real positive responses. But changing your response to risk, uncertainty, and opportunity is the title of his subject matter. And I always talk about, if you know the right ways to trade, the concepts and techniques, then psychology is a really important aspect that we all could get better at. It's not going to be something you want to learn first and get you to be successful, but it is something that's a void in all of us, because from a psychological standpoint, I'm not saying we're all in trouble, but we all could get better. And sometimes what's in between our ears are holding us back. So with that, Andrew, we appreciate you coming on and doing this. Open up your mic and take it away.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay. I'll do a really brief little background on myself. Anthony already talked about me, but I know many of you already know me. Those of you who don't, my background is I'm a psychologist. I'm also a trader and a coach. I've been trading for many, many years, been working with traders. I think the first trader I worked with was in 95 or 96, so it's over 20 years. And I'm sure most of you have probably read about trading psychology. You've probably watched webinars. And what I'm going to share with you today is an approach to trading psychology that I've been using for a long time, and it's probably one of the newer paradigms in trading psychology that you're probably beginning to hear about in the last couple of years, but it's something I've been working with a long time, which is the idea that emotion is not the enemy, that emotion is actually information. And if you can learn how to use the information, how to analyze it, interpret it, then you can change your behavior. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So without further ado, let's get right into the presentation. Let's see. A lot of folks come to trading with this in mind, right? A picture of a nice tropical scenario. I'm going to trade and I'm going to make a lot of money, or I'm going to support my retirement, increase my nest egg, whatever it may be. People have dreams and expectations when they come to trading. And when you read about how you can become a successful trader, all the different advertisements and the marketing campaigns and all that, and just this morning I was watching on CNBC that Trade Like Chuck guy who took $4,600 and turned it into some incredible amount of income every month. I mean, just these dreams and expectations that everyone has in trading. The problem is that trading is more like this. Trading is really about being under a lot of pressure. I call them pressure points in trading. Pressure points as in, do I get in? Do I stay in? Do I get out? And we're constantly facing these pressure points. And that's what trading is all about. The reality is trading, in my opinion, what I've experienced myself in my own trading and what I've seen from many, many traders, both good traders and not so good traders and everyone in between, is that how you tolerate, how you respond to discomfort, the discomfort of risk, the discomfort of uncertainty, and even the discomfort of opportunity. How you respond to feeling uncomfortable, that will define your P&L. Again, as Anthony said earlier, of course, the caveat here is once you have an edge in the market, right? You have to have an edge. You have to have a way of understanding market dynamics and have a tradable edge. But after that, it's really all about how you're going to handle discomfort of waiting, being in a trade that's kind of working but not working as well as you wanted it to work, or having to book that loss, whatever the discomfort may be. It's how you handle the discomfort in trading is really going to influence, it's going to be the primary variable that impacts your P&L. So what happens is many people, after they come to trading, they recognize that emotions, or they feel that emotions, or they've read that emotions are the enemy. I need to get rid of my emotions. I need to control my emotions. And traders often think that being more like this guy, Mr. Spock, is the way to go. You know, Spock makes decisions based on logic without any emotion. Wouldn't it be nice to be like Spock when it comes to trading? However, there's a big problem. We're never going to be like Spock because we're not Vulcans. I'm not a big Star Trek fan at all, but I'm using this analogy, so bear with me. We have human brains, and our brains respond to risk, uncertainty, and opportunity much differently than Spock's Vulcan brain that only has logic circuits and does not have any emotional areas of the brain at all. We're not like Spock. We're never going to be like Spock. So let's not try to be like Spock, and let's just use what we have, which is emotion. Now, what happens in trading, I'm sure everyone has seen the two pieces of advice that I have on the slide here: plan the trade and trade the plan, and only take high probability setups. That advice, it's well-meaning advice, and we hear this all the time from others, trading educators, all kinds of people involved in trading, and it's very, very well-meaning. The problem is that there's something very wrong with this advice. There's something really missing with both of these statements. What's missing with the first statement is the fact that when we plan the trade, we are in what I call a relatively cool state of mind. We're calm, collected, planning the trade. That's when our intellect is involved usually. And, you know, we can plan a trade. We can make a plan. It's not that difficult to create a trading plan. When it comes time to execute, to trade the plan, the second half of that statement, plan the trade and trade the plan, the execution part, at that point, our brain is now in a hot state, no longer in a cool, calm, collected state. We're in a hot state. We're in that pressure point, or that pressure pot that I showed earlier. So what happens is, what's missing with the plan the trade and trade the plan piece of advice, what's really missing here is that it's two different brain states. In fact, different areas of the brain, very different areas that are involved in planning the trade versus trading the plan. Planning the trade is the prefrontal cortex. It's the intellectual areas of the brain, executive control, logic. You know, most people can do that fairly well. Trading the plan is actually going to involve feeling okay, feeling confident, feeling as though you can do this, having some sense of this may work. That's a feeling. That's an emotion. And so we're going to talk more about emotions and feelings and how they work in your trading. I want to get to the next statement. The only take high probability setups. That's a very appealing statement, and it makes a lot of sense. And of course, no one can really disagree with it in trading. Problem is that, again, it's woefully inadequate. It's not going to help you at all to hear this statement, because what happens is when you're faced with that high probability setup, here it is on your screen, hey, there's a whatever percentage that it could work based upon backtesting or whatever it is you have as your criteria. What's going to happen at that point in time is that if the setup hasn't worked recently, or if you've just taken a loss, or if you're on a win streak, whatever it is, the context, whether it's the market context or your own P&L or trading context, the most recent context that you're experiencing is going to influence whether or not you take that high probability setup. So this is a problem, right? We're not going to just say, hey, let's only take high probability setups. As a matter of fact, most people have Post-it notes, or at one point they've had Post-it notes if they don't have them now, around being patient, don't be greedy, take the loss, or only take high probability setups, or stick to my plan, or whatever it is. The problem is those Post-it notes get ignored. They blend into the background, and they don't result in behavior change at all. So what's happening? What's happening here is that emotion plays a huge role in everything that we do, from our perception to our judgment to our analysis, and it's part of everything. This slide here that I'm showing everyone has a quote from one of the more respected researchers in the field of emotion. You can read it for yourself. I'm not going to read it out loud. But the idea is that recent brain imaging research, fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, it's a technology that's been around for about 10, 15 years. It's gotten a lot better in the last 7 or 8 years. The granularity of the research has improved, so we can really see what's happening in the brain. That this MRI research is showing how the brain relies on emotion as much, if not more, than it relies on our intellect in decision making, especially in high-pressure situations where risk is involved. Specifically, what's happening is that brain imaging shows that emotion prioritizes, it's like a gatekeeper, it prioritizes our attention and influences our perception. In fact, survival, our actual biological and physical survival, depends on the maintenance of the body's physiology within an optimum homeostatic range, like breathing and heart rate and things like that. What's interesting is that there's areas of the brain that their function is to detect physiological changes, okay? Subtle physiological changes to maintain homeostasis. The detection of these homeostatic deviations, whether it's heart rate, breathing, thirst, whatever it may be, the detection of these homeostatic deviations occurs through a process that we recognize as feelings. I feel hungry, I feel thirsty, I feel tired. The leading neuroscientific view among neurobiologists, and I know several of them who do this research at Stanford, just down the road from where I live here in San Francisco, the leading neuroscientific view is that emotion is information, and it plays a huge role in influencing our perception and our thinking. Let me just share with you an example of how this works. Visual perception and emotion have traditionally been seen as separate functions. But some interesting recent research by a couple of psychologists, I have them listed here on the slide, and others as well, and they're not the only ones that have discovered this, shows that emotion affects how and what we see with our eyes, with our actual vision. So here what you're looking at is a well-known optical illusion that serves as an example of how emotion can influence visual perception. In this case, global versus local orientation of perception. The two orange dots are the same size. They are the same size, believe me. But they appear to be different due to context. Now here's where it gets interesting. A negative emotional state, like if you're very angry or extremely fearful or very, very anxious, a strong negative emotional state results in a more local orientation, reducing the context effect, and in this case, increasing accuracy. In other words, if you're in a pretty calm, neutral state, you're going to see the orange dots as different sized. But if you're in a very heightened, negative emotional state, like angry or frustrated or very anxious, it's more likely that these orange dots are going to appear more similar in size. Now, in my opinion, that's pretty significant. Your emotional state can influence what you see with your eyes. Pretty amazing. And it goes back, it's a two-way street. If you see a lot of red on your screen, I don't like to use red candles, red and green. I like to use different shades of blue, light and dark. Red will also make you experience risk differently as well. The idea here is that our emotional state influences what we see, and what we see can influence our emotional state as well. It goes back and forth, like I said. Let me give you another example of how this works. Another example of the impact of emotion on perception is that anger reduces our peripheral vision, that what we see from the side. In other words, anger truly creates tunnel vision. You probably heard that old expression, a horse with blinders on or tunnel vision because you're so angry. There's actually a kernel of truth to that, biologically speaking. Emotion is a very strong influence on how the environment is perceived. As humans, we are very, very sensitive to picking up on patterns. Let me just share an example with you, a non-trading example. I know of people who work at Apple, very good friends and very close to somebody who works at Apple, and a story that I heard from them was that many years ago when the iPod had come out, when they first came out with the shuffle mode in the iPod, Apple began to get a lot of complaints from users saying that it wasn't random, that certain songs were playing more often, some songs were never being played at all, there were streaks, people just claimed that it just didn't seem random at all. When Steve Jobs heard about it, when enough complaints came through, he went to the iPod engineers and he told them to change the algorithm on the iPod to make it just less than random. After they changed it to becoming less than random, the complaints stopped. People perceived it as being random at that point. It's a true story. So the reason why the brain is a pattern seeker is due to evolutionary forces. We see what we want to see, and there's reasons for this. Back in the hunter-gathering phase of human existence, we had to learn to adapt to survive because we certainly were not bigger or stronger or faster than the other animals, than the other beings that we were sharing our environment with. Recognizing the pattern of movement behind that large rock, is that dinner or is it danger? Is that going to be my dinner or am I going to be someone else's crunchy protein snack? Those of our ancestors who were able to recognize the patterns consistent with threat or opportunity survived, and they passed on their genes. Human adaptation is facilitated by the ability to recognize patterns in the environment, to see signs of danger or opportunity, threat versus opportunity. It's a really important concept. We do this very subconsciously as well as consciously, simultaneously on different levels. What's happening is that our brain responds to patterns automatically, subconsciously, and involuntarily. It's hardwired into us. It's part of our survival system. Now, there's a lot of different things that occur in the brain when we notice a pattern. One thing, by the way, guys and gals, I'm going to have Q&A later. Rather than sort of taking questions now, just so you know, we'll stop at a certain point, and I'll be happy to take your questions. So let me speak about some patterns some more and how patterns affect us and how we react to patterns that we see. So there's a lot of different things, and I'm not going to make this into a neuroscience class or a psychology class, so I had to pick and choose just a few things to share with you today. A lot of things occur in the brain when we notice a pattern. One of the things that occurs, one of many things that's occurring in the brain, is that the anterior cingulate area becomes activated, and it actually anticipates the repetition when something repeats. After 2 occurrences, the brain expects a 3rd occurrence. In other words, there is a neurological truth to the saying that 3 is a trend. 2 is a coincidence and 3 is a trend. The brain actually believes that. Now let's apply this to the market. I'm going to use an example, sort of an investing example, not necessarily a short-term trading example, because I also work with money managers as well, that if a company has beaten their earnings or a fund has beaten its benchmark performance like 2 quarters in a row, people begin to expect a 3rd beat. After 2, that's when they expect a 3rd. Whether you see something that occurs twice on your screen, that's when you expect it to occur a 3rd time. Once, you may not expect it to occur a 2nd time, but after 2 times, you begin to expect that 3rd. That's when the I get it part, that's when that anterior cingulate kicks in, the I get it experience. Oh, there's going to be a 3rd. Now there's a dark side to this neurobiology dynamic that I'm sharing with you. The dark side is that we're not just being able to anticipate something, but what happens is that a broken pattern, if the two does not lead to a third, a broken pattern leads to a very different type of a reaction in another area of the brain, a very violent reaction in the insula area. And that generates, the insula generates very intense feelings of anxiety. As a matter of fact, the longer the pattern has been in place, the more violent the insula reaction is when the pattern is actually finally broken. You know, and eventually all patterns break. Now this helps explain sharp sell-offs when a growth company breaks a pattern of earnings. It also explains, I believe, in my opinion as a trader myself, why we don't always see this, but why down moves often happen to occur quicker or faster or seem to be more aggressive than up moves. I've worked with a lot of floor traders, former floor traders, market makers, different exchanges, and you know the old saying that people use, stairs up, elevator down. I believe market takes the stairs up and the elevator down. I believe it's because when things are going down, it kind of breaks a pattern, and then there's more of a violent reaction, and people essentially freak out, and that's what happens. So this is my don't fight the Fed slide. Well, actually, that's just a joke. I'm kind of kidding. Well, maybe I'm not kidding. I'll let you think about whether I'm kidding or not. Besides pattern seeking, the brain is also hardwired for a lot of things, including a threat response, right? We've all heard of the fight, flight, or freeze, which is an evolutionary survival strategy. Now, fear is what triggers this threat response. Fear is hardwired in the human brain as part of our survival gear. We will never, ever be like Spock. It's impossible. So don't even try. When people tell me that they're not an emotional person, I smile inside because I know that they actually are. They just don't understand how they are, or they don't recognize it for themselves. Emotional response, like fear for this bullfighter, is required because without fear, we can take on too much risk. This is where, I talked about earlier in the beginning of this presentation about how emotion is information. Here's an example. Fear tells us that we're in danger. It's a piece of information. Now, how you react to the fear, how you react to the information is the key. It's not the emotion that's the problem. The emotion is just a signal. It's how you react to the signal is the issue. Emotion such as fear, it modulates and it guides our cognition, our perception, to enable adaptive responses to the environment. Like I said earlier with that slide from the researcher at Harvard, emotion prioritizes our attention and influences how we see the world. So fear and other emotions per se are not the problem. Fear, for example, is just fuel for action. What type of action are you going to take? You're going to get in, you're going to get out, or you're going to stay in. The problems arise when you either under or overreact to the emotion. The emotion's always going to be there, folks. Can't turn it off. There's ways to learn to tolerate it, though, and we'll talk about that here in a few slides, how to tolerate strong emotions, because that's one of the keys to better trading. Most traders are consciously focusing on the external data, what I call the external data. And this external data, market, economy, news, past results, what you see on the screen. But what I refer to as the internal data, which includes our emotion and our biology, and those two interact a lot. Biology and emotions are very interactive. They're not separate. I gave you some examples earlier of how they interact. Our emotions and our biology interact, and the interaction exerts a very powerful influence on our perception of risk, and it influences our decisions, especially when the external data is ambiguous. And as a trader, we all know, I see it all the time. What I see on my screen is ambiguous. There's signs for me and signs against me all the time, right? There's always ambiguous data that we're going to be exposed to in trading. Now, I mentioned that there's a lot of interaction between biology and emotion, and I could spend a whole hour just talking about that, or actually many hours, but I'm not going to do that. I'll just give you a couple of examples, just a couple of examples of how the interaction between between biology and emotion, sometimes referred to as mind-body interaction, can impact your decision-making by altering perception and judgment. One example would be sleep. When we are sleep deprived, and I'm very familiar with this research, when we're sleep deprived, we tend to be willing to take on, it changes our perception of risk. For most people, about 68% of people, when they're sleep deprived, they will be willing to take on more risk than they usually take on. Now, this has been empirically shown with 4 different groups, including traders is one of the groups. It's been shown with commercial airline pilots, surgeons, professional poker players, and traders. There's probably been other groups that have been researched as well, but I'm familiar with those 4 demographics. Sleep deprivation leads to greater risk-seeking behavior. Another example of the interaction between biology and emotion is glucose, or a type of blood sugar. When our glucose levels are low, we're going to have less willpower. So one of the things you want to do is you want to eat properly, maintain good glucose levels, have a good amount of protein in the morning. So if you have a donut and coffee in the morning, a couple hours later, your glucose levels are going to be really low and your willpower will be pretty much non-existent or very low. So keep, eating protein throughout the day, especially in the morning, will help to keep the glucose levels higher. Another example of the biology and emotion, the internal data kind of working together to influence what we see and how we react to it. Another example are all the various, and there's a lot of these, various subtle shifts in neurochemistry, which I won't get into here, but the big one would be the neuroendocrine profile of testosterone and cortisol ratios, right? How aggressive we feel and how stressed out we feel. The ratio between testosterone and cortisol, that ratio has a huge influence on our risk-taking behaviors. And this has been researched, including with traders. And it plays out on trading desks all the time. So the main point of the slide, this is not a lecture, and this is not a neuroscience class, folks, but this is stuff that to me is very important to understand or to know about. Because the main point of the slide is that analyzing what I call the internal data improves our decision making, because the internal data not only influences our perception of the external data, it provides the fuel for our actions. If you know what is really fueling your behavior, you're going to have a better chance of changing it. Now, earlier I talked about tolerating emotions, tolerating discomfort, how discomfort in its various forms will always be part of trading. So let's talk a little bit about managing emotions. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I have several different models I've developed. This is what I do with my clients and whatnot. So managing emotion. Emotion, first of all, the first thing you have to understand in managing emotion is that emotion is involved in every decision, and no matter what you think, you're in an emotional state. Even if you're really calm, calmness is an emotional state. In other words, there's no way to exist without having emotion, okay? So what I like to do is I like to teach people a variety of strategies to help them manage their emotions, to identify their emotions, and to understand how these emotions are contributing to their behavior. So here, like I said, here's a quick example, or a nice simple model. This is one of the simpler models of managing emotion. The first step is to anticipate or acknowledge, I should say anticipate emotion. Even though you may be calm now, anticipate that there's going to be another feeling or another emotion coming shortly. And not only that, but emotions happen on different layers, different dimensions. So you want to always be anticipating emotional change and powerful emotion, because there'll always be one around the corner, no doubt. You also want to be able to acknowledge emotion. Acknowledging the emotion is really important. I'm going to spend some time talking about this. Acknowledging the emotion, I can break it down into various sub-steps, but the idea here is you want to first acknowledge it, but also to express it with words. Anyone who's worked with me or knows me or has read my blog or is familiar with my work knows that I'm a very big proponent in writing about how you feel in a very deep and honest way while you're feeling it, not after the fact, but while you're feeling it. It's been my experience, as well as there's a lot of empirical research to back this up, that the more you can describe how you feel with words, and the more granular you can be with this, the more detailed, the more specific you can get with your use of words and how you feel, and the more honest you are with yourself as you describe what you're feeling, the more you're able to do those things, the more you're able to gain control over your urges. The more you're able to describe how you feel, the more you're able to gain control over your urges. I said that twice because that's a really important concept, because we all succumb to urges, right? Some people are too impulsive with their trades. They get in too quickly or too often. They overtrade, or they get out too quickly, first sign of heat, or whatever it may be. Now, the third step, analyzing emotion, really important. What I mean by this is to understand the context in which the emotion occurs. That's one level of analyzing the emotion. For example, if you're in a losing trade, to understand that anger, frustration, fear, there's probably other emotions as well. Those are all going to be expected emotions in a trade that's going against you. So as you analyze what you're feeling, of course, those are what I would call the every trader's emotions in a loss, right? But then you need to take it further and analyze why specifically, since you know intellectually that some trades are going to result in losses, not every trade is going to work. A lot of trades are going to be losses. Since we know that losses are part of trading, why is it that we still have such strong, powerful feelings around having to take a loss, for example? I submit to you that it's not simply about this trade. It's not simply about having to book that loss. The anxiety, the fear, the frustration, the anger, the combination of emotions that come with this loss, or the idea that we may have to take a loss, or the idea that I may have to get into a trade, whatever the pressure is that you're facing. I'm using a loss as just one example. What's happening is that you need to understand that there will be a variety of emotional feelings, emotional states occurring on different levels, that most of this emotion is actually coming from something that has nothing to do with this trade. The trade is just the piece that you're aware of. Oh, I'm really frustrated, I'm angry, I'm pissed off, I'm afraid, whatever it may be, that I'm going to have to take a loss. Well, those feelings are very strong, and they're strong because it's not, again, just about this loss. It's really also about your dream of becoming a successful trader. It's going to delay the dream. It may even derail the dream. I won't be able to make money today. How am I going to tell my wife, girlfriend, husband that I didn't make money today, that I lost money? Those are the feelings that are also there as well. Now, we also bring with us a lot of feelings, we bring our entire personality with us to trading, and maybe we'll talk about this more in the Q&A because I don't have a slide about this. But a lot of traders, we all bring our entire being, our entire personality with us to trading. And some of us have backgrounds where we're more perfectionistic, or we're more logical based, or whatever it may be. And we bring those traits, which may be very good traits, and have helped us succeed in other areas of our lives, other previous career or other areas of life. Many of those strengths that have helped us in other areas will backfire in trading. For example, the need to be perfect can be really helpful as an accountant, or as a physician, or an engineer, but as a trader, it's going to really screw you up. That's just one example. We can talk about this maybe more in the Q&A. So I'm going to increase the pace here so I can get to the Q&A, get through the slides. I talked about that under the influence internal, external data earlier, and I'll just want to reiterate how the internal data is largely subconscious. Okay, even our feelings, our emotional state is usually outside of our awareness, and there are various layers to this emotional state. And working towards making what was previously subconscious, making it more conscious, is really something that I would suggest you consider doing for yourself, because that's how you're going to be able to change your behavior. Often we are not consciously aware of what we are feeling until it becomes closer to potentially turning into a behavior. Okay? Say that again. Often we're not consciously aware of what we're feeling until it becomes closer to potentially turning into a behavior. And at that point, it could become too late. The urge can become too powerful. So what I try and do is I help my clients analyze their internal data, including their emotions, and understand the subconscious motivations driving their behavior. Some of the examples of these subconscious motivations include things like social and professional status, how you appear in the eyes of others, your neighbor, your wife, your family, whoever it may be, your need for approval from others, a need for control, how you respond to authority, and many, many, many other factors play into this. These are all the various examples of how the subconscious dynamics influence how we interact with the market. In my own work with traders, I'll use a variety of different tools to increase self-awareness, to make what is subconscious more conscious, and to develop emotional awareness and emotional intelligence. It's a very effective way of changing one's response to uncertainty, risk, and opportunity. Sometimes, using biological or mind-body interventions like biofeedback can also be very helpful as well. There's been a lot of interesting research, some of the research that came out of London in the last couple of years showing that traders on trading desks, institutional traders, those traders who had greater perception of their internal processes, who could sense their heart rate and breathing, who had better awareness of that, actually had better P&L. People who were more tuned into their internal state had better P&L. Very interesting. A lot of folks get caught in a vicious cycle in trading, right? People, you can make money for a few trades or a few days or maybe even a few weeks or a month or two perhaps. Usually a few weeks is about as long as it goes for most folks before you give it back. There's usually a big give back. The give back usually occurs much faster than the accumulation, right? You make money for a few trades or a few days or a few weeks, and then all of a sudden you have one big bad day or one big bad trade or something happens and you give it all back or most of it back. This is the vicious cycle that most traders are caught in. A lot of other traders are just kind of more hovering around the break-even line as well, where they're maybe not in a vicious cycle, but they just can't seem to get past the starting point. And I will tell you that if you change nothing, then nothing will change. Reading about trading psychology, attending this webinar, good step. But you're going to actually have to probably do more than reading about it. You actually have to have some new experiences for yourself, create new psychological experiences, new experiences in order to help change your behavior. Just reading about changing behavior isn't going to change your behavior. And reading about personality traits, of great traders, that's not going to help you either, because you're not going to develop those personality traits. You're who you are. You're you and you're who you are. You better just to learn to work with who you are and what you have. Learn to leverage your strengths. So one of the important concepts that I want to leave you with here as we get towards the end of the presentation and get towards the Q&A is the idea that if you can align yourself or focus on what I call process goals over outcome goals in your trading. Outcome goals, that's your P&L, that's how much money did I make, how many winners did I have, that kind of stuff. Those are outcome goals. Outcome goals are not something that we can control, okay? Can't control the market, can't control whether you make money, can't control anything like that. But outcome goals are a byproduct of process goals. Process goals are things that you can control, but it takes effort, it takes practice. There's different types of process goals, right? An example of process goal would be, I'm going to write down what I'm feeling and why I'm feeling it while I'm watching the market, while I'm in a trade, because I usually get out of trades too early and I want to be able to hold on to them longer. So I'm going to try and manage my anxiety by talking about it. That's an example of a process goal. And then you evaluate yourself, how well did you do that for the day. So I would suggest having process goals. It's one example of a process goal. There's many possibilities. And evaluating yourself based on process goals more than evaluating yourself based upon outcome. Because if you have an edge in your trading, right, and you're properly capitalized, it's really going to come down to having the right process goals. And if you can focus on creating the right process goals then and focus on those, it's going to lead you to where you want to go in your trading. And I'll say that the ultimate process goal is the ability to control your actions despite being uncomfortable. Now here we are kind of coming towards the end of the webinar, and I'm just going to say that a lot of you have probably read about trading psychology. Most of you, if not all of you, will probably read about trading psychology again and watch more webinars and read blogs and whatnot. But I'll just ask, I want you to consider what's your plan for yourself after this webinar. And I just want to give you 3 takeaways or a couple of takeaways from the webinar before we get into the Q&A. I've shown you how emotion influences our perception and our judgment. There's no escaping emotion and how it influences us, even our eyesight. I've given you evidence that the brain's wiring relies on emotion as much as intellect in our decision making. And I've shown you how understanding our subconscious motivations underlying our behavior will reduce our mistakes. So with that, I'm sure people have questions. I'd be happy to take questions at this point, Anthony. If you wouldn't mind reading them for me, that'd be great. Happy to answer whatever you guys have for me.
No, that sounds good, Andrew, and this was excellent. I don't have a particularly easy time paying attention, but I was able to with this, so it shows you that content must have been pretty good. So one question that came in during the middle of it was, and maybe you could repeat it, the Apple story that you talked about. Could you kind of go over that again and repeat it?
Sure. So this was many years ago when they came out with the shuffle, which is the random play mode on an iPod. Apple began to get complaints that it wasn't random, that there were streaks of songs, some songs being played more than others, and some songs never played. So the perception was that it was not random, and after enough complaints, Steve Jobs told the engineers to change the algorithm to make it actually not random. Now I don't know if it's still if it's the same today as it was back then years ago, but after they changed it to being less than random, that's when people felt it was random at that point. In other words, randomness or perception of randomness is kind of in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it was like his engineers could say, but Mr. Jobs, this is random. Look at it. It is random. But if the reality is they don't think it is, then it's not.
Their experience was that it wasn't random. And because that's what their experience was, that's what they had to go with, right? They sell products. They wanted to sell more products. They didn't want to upset their user base, so they had to make it less than random for people to experience or think it was random.
So we trick ourselves. Our mind
all the time. Yeah. There's a whole field of behavioral economics, behavioral finance with cognitive biases, and I've done presentations for those at investor conferences. And the problem with that stuff is, Kahneman, thinking fast and slow, prospect theory, loss aversion, confirmation bias. Those are all wonderful things to know about. The problem is nobody ever talks about how to change those, how to change your reaction or response to those things, how to not fall into those traps. But yeah, there's a lot of cognitive biases, a lot of traps that are there for us in trading, and most people are going to fall into the same traps over and over.
Here's a good question. First of all, thanks for teaching and presenting to us today, says Clayton. A recent book he read, Capture by Dr. Kessler, talks about the ability to direct our attention as a key to taking appropriate action. What are some techniques for improving our ability to focus our attention on our emotions and decrease the effect of distractions?
Well, there's kind of two different aspects of that question, like how do you use your attention to direct your focus and follow through what you want to do. I mean, you can do things like mental rehearsal and visualization for that, but then how do you deal with the emotion so that doesn't get in the way of you following through what you had initially planned on doing? That's a bit of a different animal, and or a different thing. And that different thing, what you want to do with that, the second thing, is really about understanding. First of all, it's recognizing what you feel and understanding why you feel that way. In the process, Clayton, of understanding why you feel a certain way, that's what's going to lead you, that's what's going to ultimately lead you away from falling into the same trap. Because if you're in that, I don't know if this is your case at all, your situation whatsoever, but I'll use this as an example. Let's say you're in a trade and it's not at your stop level yet, but you're nervous that it may not work. Maybe it's halfway to your target or whatever. It's sort of in no man's land. And you're someone who typically gets out of trades way too early. And you want to be able to hold on to your winning trades longer. So being able to analyze why you feel anxious, being able to recognize the anxiety and place that anxiety into context and be able to ask yourself things like, when have I felt this before? What do I usually do when I feel this way? How does that usually work out for me? That kind of level of analysis in real time is what I'm referring to. But you have to do that out loud or on paper with writing it out. You can't just do that in your head mentally, what I just described, because it will not work.
That's a good question and a good answer. I like that. That was a good comment.
Thank you.
Have you, hold on, Grace, do you have a mic hooked up? Or no? Oh, okay. Let me reread your... Yeah, but you're not going to get one within the next 10 seconds, are you? I was going to have her read this question. So, all right. Let me follow up with what Tom just said. So your best advice to change is to write detailed explanation of our current feelings in a trade.
I wouldn't put it that way necessarily. It's not really a detailed explanation. It's really a detailed exploration. It's not about explaining, because that's where you're going to get into the intellectual mode. It's really about allowing yourself to experience the vulnerability, allowing yourself to experience the fear and anxiety, and then placing that into context. So it's not just about explaining it. It's about allowing yourself to experience it, acknowledge it, experience it, and while you're experiencing it, to analyze it as well. So it's not simply about just explaining it to yourself. You'd be really short-circuiting.
So when you're talking out loud to do this, what are some key words or phrases to start with?
Wow, great question, Anthony. Very few people ever ask that. So one of the things I'll do with my coaching clients is that I will give them a vocabulary list of emotional words to use, because most people just use the same words over and over. If the more granularity, the larger vocabulary you have in terms of being able to describe how you feel, and there's been interesting empirical research on this, the greater granularity, the greater detail in your word usage, the greater chance you have, or the greater probability that you're going to be able to control your actions. So yeah, so having a lot of different words. And it can be, I'm feeling angry. What's behind my feeling angry? I'm feeling angry because my last 3 trades haven't worked, or my wife is going to ask me if I made money, if I'd made money yet, or what's behind that? In other words, you need to really go into the feeling itself and what's behind that feeling. What you're going to find is that there's many other feelings behind that feeling, many other concerns, and it's going to be very much it can be very difficult to kind of untangle all the different feelings from each other, but just the process of attempting to look at the different feelings, that process alone, that in and of itself, is extremely beneficial, extremely helpful, and it can mean the difference between, for someone who's like an impulse trader, over trading, and being able to control themselves and being able to, trade more mindfully. It can also make a huge difference for someone who gets out of trades too quickly because they can't stand the anxiety. Being able to manage the discomfort through understanding what you feel and why you feel it is, again, to me, it's extremely important. And I'll say this.
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Yeah. The one thing I didn't mention in the webinar, and it's a line that I like to use a lot. I'm sort of surprised I didn't actually use it. I'm just realizing I didn't utter this one statement, but it's very important. And that is, we don't see the market as it is. We see it as we are. Okay? Everything we see, including a market, the world, everything, the screen in front of us, the road in front of you, the street, everything you're looking at is seen through a personal filter. And understanding how your personal filter operates is the first and most important step, the most important step to changing how you interact or behave in that environment. So I could say a lot more, but I'll leave it at that, let you guys go on with more questions.
Well, that explains how I feel when I'm drinking, some of the things I see. But that's another story and presentation. No, but what my thought was when I interrupted you was it's not about avoiding or explaining your feeling. It's about accepting it. And you might have said it in so many words, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for expanding on that point, which I kind of glossed over. Accepting it, and then once you're able to accept it, part and parcel of that is also kind of understanding why you have the feeling, the context, and when you've had this feeling before, where it comes from, that it's probably not just about this trade. So yeah, accepting is a huge part of it.
So if you accept the feeling, then you handle it better.
That's one aspect of handling it better, accepting it, one piece of it. Accepting it and understanding where it comes from and why you have it. Yep.
So it's a recognition of it, and it's not like, let's not avoid it. Let's just get through it and not let it not let it pull us around anymore, right?
Right.
Oh, that's pretty important and pretty powerful. So Grace asks, have you ever worked with any musician/traders?
I have, actually. Interesting question.
Do they tend, let me finish your question, do they tend to be better or see patterns any differently or any better? Because
they do tend to see patterns, perhaps better, maybe, I think. It's hard to say. I can't say that empirically, but I think so, just anecdotally from my experience. And one thing that they do have a bit of a leg up on is the idea that they kind of usually, not always, it's a bit of a stereotype here, but the few that I've worked with, or several that I've worked with, pretty much all of them had a pretty, they were pretty clued into how they felt. So oftentimes when I work with a coaching client, oftentimes one of the first steps for many clients is I have to help them get in touch with how they really feel. They just only know some of the stuff. They don't really know what's really down deep inside of them. Whereas musicians often are more in touch with how they feel. Not always, but often they are. So that's often they're kind of one step ahead. They already know how they feel, and it's really a matter of them learning to analyze how they feel.
No, that's interesting because their background, how that meshes or collides with this and the whole pattern recognition. I mean, this is to me, and I've told this to the group, and I think I mentioned it to you in our phone calls, Andrew, that they brought in a psychologist in the prop firm, and a little bit of this session is better than what even I had experience with in talking with that individual. You seem to be much more in touch with what traders go through, a lot more than he did.
I think two reasons for that. One, I'm not sure who the psychologist is you're referring to, but one, I'm a trader myself, and two, although there's a lot of interesting research and there's a lot of psychologists that have written interesting things, and you know, I call the encyclopedia of trading. There's tons of information out there on trading psychology. Most of it's not effective, and I kind of boil it down to what actually works, not just what sounds good, not what plays well in the blogs and reading, but actually what works. And it's not so sexy, actually. It's really about understanding what you feel and why you feel it, which doesn't have as much sex appeal, or it doesn't sound as fun or cool as other stuff that you hear about in trading psychology, but that's really what works.
Yeah, no, and that's it. And it wasn't, a mark against him. It's exactly what you said. You've experienced it. You've done it. You're doing it. He didn't. So it was his introduction to our world. And, a lot of people, Doctor, they don't even understand that this business exists. Even today, even though electronic trading has been around for a good 15 years, and the technology has allowed the domestic internet connection to be good enough to not get frozen charts or domes or whatever. And so all of a sudden you get all this uptick and all this exposure, and still most people don't realize this is something you have access to in your living room if you want. So most guys and girls, they don't understand that people actually do this for a living, or can do this for a living, or can do it for part-time investment. It doesn't even have to be day trading, right? It could just be managing money or hey, I'm going to, one interesting schedule that some of the group has is the, they're going to trade, and this goes to a lot of my guys I've traded with in the prop firm is they're going to trade when they know the market's busy around big numbers, big events, or when the market's busy and when it's probably not going to be. So their schedule is morphed into they're just going to sit and trade more volatile markets, and when they're not, they don't have to work or whatever. It's kind of like a semi-retired mode to be in. And a lot of people are adopting that don't have to pull money out of the market every day. They can sit back and say, I'm going to trade the markets and the days that adhere to my style and strategy. But even with that being said, you got to harness everything you're talking about.
Exactly. And I like what you said, Anthony. I mean, there's going to be times when your edge is more available and more present than other times, and knowing when it's my market is when I want to trade. So yeah, I'm the same way. I'm a similar kind of a trader.
The marriage of, and I always draw in my head two circles, and when the two circles overlap is when your success or edge truly is. And the two circles in this example I'm talking about or thinking about is what the owner of a prop firm used to say. He said, just because sometimes you're making good money and you're actually trading like crap, and the market is just very opportunistic, and it applies to the edge that you're trying to expose it for. And then other times you're not really doing that well, not making much money, but you're trading well. He says when you could combine trading really well to good markets is when you could make your year in a month, or you could really get out ahead,
Exactly. And the way you can set that up, prepare for that is, first, recognize when it's going to be your market, but then the other piece is be focused on process goals, as I mentioned earlier. So if you have the right process goals, that's when you can trade well. So if you're trading well, and then you're trading well in your kind of market, wow, like you said, man, then you're off to the races.
Could you repeat? Someone had asked, well, you had said it twice, so it was important. Do you remember what that was? I remember you saying
was it about process goals, or?
I think so. I think it was on that slide, and it says you had said it twice, and you even said
what's yeah. Not sure. I said a lot. Well, so basically, there's most people are tuned into outcome goals. Am I making money? Am I not making money? How much money did I make? How many winners did I have? Losers? Most people are really focused on outcome goals. Problem is outcome goals are not within our control. What's within our control are process goals, or process, what you're actually doing. So if you have specific process goals, evaluate your trading based upon what you do, not on what the market does, but what on you do, and improve on those processes with, using goals as a benchmark, then that's how you change. And what you just said, Anthony, is great. I love the combination. So if you are trading well and it's your market, that's the killer combo. And the idea is you need to set yourself up and create that kind of you need to have that platform, if you will. Maybe that's not the best word, but you need to have the trading well needs to be in place, right? So when your market does appear or shows up, or here it is, it's morphing into your market, you can apply your process that has been tightened up, and you can go to town and make a lot of money. So yeah, I've worked with traders, and you'll see this very often. I've worked with probably some of the best day traders in the world, actually. And what a lot of these guys will do, not all of them, but a lot of them, is they have what I call a lumpy P&L. They'll make a bunch of money in a short period of time, and then they won't trade for a while, or they might kind of they won't trade so well, but they'll be lighter because they know it's not their kind of market, waiting for their kind of market to show up again, and they trade and they put the pedal to the metal again, and they might have another big period. So this is what happens, and the better traders kind of will recognize that for themselves. Not perfectly, but they tend to do it more so than the rest of the traders are.
And they do it faster. Like I early in 2009, I recognized the markets weren't as volatile and opportunistic as they were in all of 2007 and 2008 with the financial crisis. So I went in just naturally in the capital preservation mode. My goals were a lot lighter, and it might have had to do by default without me knowing it. My process goals were, I was actually, thinking unconsciously or subconsciously thinking of that, because I knew that the outcome goals were probably going to be lighter. And that adjustment of what you were making to what you can make is important, because saving money is like making money. in anything, but especially in trading. So
Yep.
there were guys I traded with that weren't bad traders at all, profitable guys that had their head beat in the first few months of '09 because they were expecting it to be what the last few months of '08 were. But things had changed. So while they didn't blow out, obviously, they gave back some money, and you got to know when to take your foot off the gas.
Oh, yeah. A great example that I remember really, really, really well, and I actually shared my my trading results actually with Brett Steenberger. We kind of looked at it together. It was back in the first quarter of 2012. I don't know if people remember this, but there was about 3 months in the first quarter of 2012 where the market was just slowly grinding up. It was just like a pretty steady uptrend, and people were not expecting it. It was like really kind of a lot of narrow range days, some overlapping days, not a lot of fireworks, but there were some days that were like that, but it was generally a slow, grinding up move market. And it took me a while to kind of recognize what was happening, but once I did, I kind of adjusted my style, and I actually did really, really, really well during that period. It was only because I had to recognize what was happening and not fight it anymore. The market kept opening on little gap ups and just kind of, maybe slightly filling the gap and then going back up to where it opened. And it was like, most days were up days. It was really, really, many people were really frustrated with it. And oftentimes, what's interesting for me is I'll look at Twitter or I'll hear, just in the trading world, when people start getting frustrated about the market, that's, a good sign that it's either about to change or the particular cycle that the market's been in has been going on for a while and people just can't take it anymore, which often, not always the case, means that it might be changing soon. The character may be changing. So, the trading psychology in terms of applying to an individual also applies to the market itself overall. There are feelings in the market. People talk about animal spirits, but you can also look at, what the other participants in the market are experiencing and going through as well. It's a whole other level of doing this work.
No, that's, to me, this is all interesting stuff, especially with your two circles, which is, right, the trading psychology side and the trading side. And that marriage, that overlap is where your value is and becomes to other people. Is there any more questions that I might have deleted on accident? I don't think I did. I think I got to everyone that had them. Your email address is on here. If anybody wanted to reach you, they get to you by your website or email, correct?
Correct.
Perfect. All right. So right now, a lot of people are thanking you and awesome webinar. Great compliments from the group, Andrew. This was really good, and I appreciate you you coming by and doing it.
No problem. If folks want to, they can. I've got a newsletter that's free. They can sign up for. You'll get a little reminder in your inbox about what you got to pay attention to. I think it may help. So
how do they get that? Just go to your website?
On my website. I think it's on the front page of my website where they can sign up for that. And it comes out every 2 weeks and with things for you to pay attention to for the next 2 weeks. So
no, that's and how often does every 2 weeks you said it comes out?
It comes out every 2 weeks, and there's about a year's worth of emails that you'll get. I need to kind of refresh it and get some more in there, but I get a lot of great feedback from it because I do some very specific exercises or specific things in that email for people to pay attention to, things like give you homework assignments. Here's what you should do for the next week or two, that kind of thing.
That's great. That's the one thing I've found working with people that I couldn't have said 4 or 5 years ago, and that is, and this goes for any endeavor, you get off on with the right intentions and on the right path, but you don't stay on the right path because any small or short, or you could stub your toe and you're off your course.
Yeah.
And it goes the same with working out and getting in a routine to keep yourself fit, and then mentally fit is what trading takes. And people, that's the best solution I found, one that's general but simple and has a real good chance of working, was the program doesn't have a finish to it, where people communicate in these weekly meetings and they stay connected, and then we have another room, so to speak, where it's like a virtual office where people stay connected. So that's your best chance to keep doing what's important, just like working out. Yeah, you know what? There's some right and wrong ways to work out when you're in the gym, but at least get to the gym. All right? At least you're in the gym. Yeah, maybe you're you're working out the wrong way that's inefficient, but at least you're there. And that's what this virtual office that we have and what this program is that, you know what I mean, is keeping you on it's your best chance to not just get on the right track, but stay on the right track, right?
Right.
A lot of people easily get knocked off. But, all right, I just got a text from my wife. It always distracts me. I always look at it. But, Andrew, thanks again. This is great. And you're welcome to come back whenever you want. And I'm actually going to go to your website and do that newsletter because that sounds cool.
Yeah, and I'll give you first 2 tips, you guys or gals. Don't look at your unrealized P&L while you're trading. Keep it off your screen. Don't be looking at the money. It's gonna screw you up. The other thing is that try and minimize the amount of red and green on your screens. Consider maybe like light blue and dark blue, but colors have a huge influence on how we feel. So
really, no kidding.
Yeah.
What did you say was
but
not
I still
good?
have some. I use red and green on my footprint because I want it because it's just a quick visual, so I can see what's happening in my footprint. By the way, folks, I was one of the original users of the footprint like 10 or 12 years ago when Trevor first came out with it at market.
No kidding.
I know Trevor. Yeah, I've known Trevor a long time. But all my other charts, candle charts, market volume profile, everything else are in shades of blue. So,
how about your background though? I've always had black just because it was easier on my eyes.
Yeah. A black background or dark gray, because white is going to contribute to eye exhaustion. It's going to strain your eyes, a lot of white. So yeah, having black or a dark gray, anything, but you don't want to be looking at bright colors.
No, that sounds good. Well, listen, good tip, Andrew, and thanks again. We appreciate it.
Sure. Happy to help.
I'm just